Whether at home or work, life is about relationships. Welcome to Small Change, Big Dividends with your host, Branch Isole. Small Change, Big Dividends shares steps, tools, and tips for personal career and spiritual growth. So please welcome the host of Small Change, Big Dividends, Branch Isole.
Truth, like the air we breathe, is all around us, every day, in every way. Last week, we looked at the first steps of recognizing and acknowledging truth, because truth is the grounding essential of life, and yet it's as elusive as we choose it to be. So the question becomes, how can we use truth to benefit daily living? Truth is not only at the core of our spiritual essence, it's the building and binding element between a spiritual and a physical life. Truth is the connection that gives purpose to each life. However, truth is hidden. It's veiled or masked by the ways of the world. And it's the ways of the world which influence our choices and decisions from our first breath to our last. Although the world showers us with distractions of every imaginable form or fashion, because we have the essence of truth living within us as part of creation, all we need to do in this life is reactivate the spirit we already have. And by reactivating the power of our spirit, that veil is pulled back on the reality of our world as we begin to see truth everywhere. And when we recognize truth, we will also automatically see the falsehoods, the lies, and the fabrications created by the world to keep us from truth and to keep truth from us. With a new recognition of truth, life offers you startling new choices for your future. So the question actually becomes, will we continue to live grappling and struggling with life 101, or will we start fresh in life 101A? Coming to you from deep in the forest, near the banks of the Ouachita River, you're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and you are my featured guest. Small Changes, Big Dividend is a show where your questions are part of the program. So if you have a question, you can call now during the live show to 1-866-451-1451, or you can email your question anytime during the week to my website, branchisole.com. Thanks for joining me again today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we talk about personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. Each week, I share mana'o with listeners from around the world. Today, I'm going to share some small changes that can pay big dividends in your relationships and in your life. Because life is about relationships, but it's healthy relationships that encourage and embrace growth. Today, we're talking about the difference between Life 101 and Life 101A. So now you're probably saying, Branch, what in the world are you talking about? Well, let me ask you this. Do you believe a spiritually guided life and an embrace the world life are on two divergent paths? Or do they appear to be complementary, like a two-sided coin or the simpatico of yin and yang? For many people, their first thought about spirituality involves peace or calm, because a spiritually grounded life often produces mental images of serenity or meditative lifestyle practitioners. For those equating spirituality with religion, however, there's often an imagined parochial attachment filled by layers of lay work and ecumenical and or fellowship obligations. If this sounds like a lot of work, perhaps that's one reason religious denominations often attempt to equate good works with the path to spiritual salvation. It's no wonder many who envision a religious path or have traveled it often turn away, wanting nothing more to do with it. Question is why? Is it difficult to distinguish a spiritual path from a religious one? Yes, no, maybe. Frequently, spirituality is the connection between you as an individual and God's Spirit, while religions most often rely on robed, intermediate conduits and or iconic relics. Spirituality's intent is grounded in peace and calm, while religions can often be more self-serving, with unspoken winks and nods in effort to control or manipulate. Many religions are akin to their brethren in politics who calculate actions focused on promoting carnal or first world lifestyles. These people and their efforts often build on accumulation of material possessions through methods or methodologies of greed and self-indulgence. But religions always give themselves an out, right? They blame God by blaming you while convincing you of your inability to distinguish God's character and nature, or, for our world, morals and ethics. But when we look closer, it's easy to see how these two, the spiritual and the carnal, might appear to be different well beyond the point of mutual exclusivity. The spiritual person usually embraces an awareness of God's unconditional care and interest for them as individuals. As the bond between God and the individual strengthens, knowledge of self retracts, because at its core, faith fulfills complementary respect between God and humanity. For those willing to wean themselves off the world's incessant focus on egotism and self-indulgence, and yet in either case, the spiritual or the worldview both have risk and reward. Reward is most often perceived as benefit gain or loss abated, and it's been said the greater the risk, the greater the reward. However, this adroit view is typically embraced wholeheartedly by those fully enveloped by the world's ways. The stronger one's belief in the power of money and its possession accumulation, the more effectual its influence to besmirch the spiritual. Carnal desires can finally hone status levels achieved as the world views enable one to prove or justify his or her comparative worth to envious onlookers. The world of competition produces a conquering of adversaries, and this is one of mankind's prime motivations. Some individuals find that winning is so compelling and satisfying, they may actually reach a psychological state where thriving on the action, that is, the risk or the gamble, becomes the motivation. This adrenaline rush can rise to intense levels, even in the face of potential or actualized loss. It's the thrill of possible consequence that can drive one to risk beyond reason or measure. This is all part of a process in the quest of winning. For many, however, win or lose, risk becomes the thrill or the juice. The chance of losing can become inconsequential compared to the appeal of the perceived risks taken. And as such, sustained levels, win or lose, a risk taker may be void of spirit. He or she may begin to ignore behavioral consequences or outcomes of repeated downfalls. As cycles of adrenaline rush escalate, winning or losing can become totally irrelevant. Drafted in the wake of cascading or spirals of defeat, emotions of unworthiness or doubt can creep into one's psyche. This culmination of downward slide may lead to aberrant behaviors of self-deceit or abuse that can be transferred to others willingly. Disregard for mental or physical health by burning the candle at both ends of risk and reward can be endured for only so long. And those leading lives of imminent burnout eventually stumble in failure or crushing defeat. It's at this low point they may turn to or actually seek spiritual cognition. We're going to pause for our first break, but when we come back, we're going to look closer at this distinction between the spiritual and the carnal guidance of everyday life. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. Today we're talking about building strength through discovery and implementation of truth's path for daily living. In many lives, age and relationship issues are often undeniable factors taking a toll that can lead to ruinous outcomes. Balance, brought about by spiritual grounding, has the capacity to help keep in check these downward spiraling effects. But this can be an arduous road. The world's path promotes and reinforces reminders to us through extensive litany of insecurities. Remember, the world's design and purpose is to challenge us at the core of truth by actions, decisions, or judgments. For the carnally disposed actions are often promoted and prompted only through the accumulation of possessions, acceptance by peers, and or recognized elevation in the eyes of superiors, of others, and even of self. This pressure can draw us into situations that test our core values in spite of potential detrimental outcome risks. There are often others who view a spiritual lifestyle as simply boring. For the spiritually grounded, this scene of boredom is a disguise, for balance can exist just below the surface of perceived complacency. And balance incorporates the human need to participate in life while still having an active regard for one's burgeoning spiritual connection. With spiritual grounding, life's limits or ramifications go beyond recorded wins or losses. Because actions and consequences influenced by spiritual intervention activate forethought before we choose or decide. And this forethought has the power to keep us out of adversity's realm. Mature spiritual believers often find that loss actually can have its own reward, for it's through loss that risk can illuminate one's best interests waiting in the shadows. Loss may also be seen as a blessing, for it provides shade to avoid future or newly cost endeavors. By our very nature, we live in a corrupted state of being. It's in our nature to always be looking for or embellishing ways to advance our lives and lifestyles. But today's length and breadth of global corruption permeates every nook and cranny of physical existence. Every one of mankind's systems has become permanently stained with corruption, for this is the way of the world. Is this a new phenomenon of our time? By no means. Mankind has lived corrupted since his beginning. And as more people fight each other while fighting to survive, and as more people possess more material goods than ever before, and as we all now have access to a world of information, there's actually no excessive level of grandiose ascension that seems to be enough. Our definitive world choice is one of lemming participation or embracing a different course. This is easier said than done, for we are not only participants in the victimization of our social order, our insatiable desires for immediate gratification without acknowledgement of consequence is commonplace today. Many of you may have seen this on display in last weekend's Super Bowl game, where one of the players, Travis Kelce, reacted inappropriately for his place and position as a team member. However, even worse was the response from the coach, who after the game laughed off Mr. Kelce's behavior. It's this coddling of inappropriate or abusive behavior by giving it license, or at least tacit approval, that has become today's evidence in every field of endeavor, industry, commerce, politics, or social decorum, giving proof positive that an attitude condoning the tail wagging the dog is evident in our culture. As the American empire, like each one before it in history, slides into disarray and demise, the rich and the powerful continue to make a mockery of law and justice. By breaking the backs of every moral or ethical standard in daily life. Sure, we acknowledge the aberrations of laws, codes, and decency all around us, and we are incensed. But at the same time, we are conditioned to ever be on the prowl for our advantage. At every turn and in every situation, we are closely pressed by an attitude of, well, what's in it for me? When decisions appear to hold benefits perceived as advantageous, clarity toward negative consequences is often less than aroused. So, with each decision and every action or interaction that we have to decide what response will be given and how we will live with its consequences. Will it be risk or reward? This is the stage on which essential struggles of life for each of us play out, because the focus on self has been refined and honed to be our first and most often response. By choosing what we hope is best for us in lieu of the cost or harm to ourselves and possibly to others. Without spiritual guidance, we soon discover what we want to be in our best interest often isn't. For the taproot of most problems and issues is on self-centered indulgence, which has become a common condition for the carnal and worldly lifestyle choice. Living with a spiritually guided inner compass and acting upon a newness of self predicates the pivotal differences for one's journey in life, carnal or spiritual. As we prepare to move forward renewed, the spiritual guided, instead of being mired in a confluence of life and relationship problems, our decisions become choices between what is now expected and no longer the past of what we hoped for. And yet, deep within each of us exists a spark of recognition we innately understand that by our very existence, we each possess a spiritual pilot light in our soul. And although this light of spirit is never extinguished, somewhere along life's journey for many, that light operates without illumination. For some it burns, for many it flickers, only to return to a dormant state. For a few, however, spirituality takes hold and the flame roars to life, revealing a new way of understanding, a new way of living, and a renewed potential grounded in truth and love. Those guided by resourcefulness of spirit learn balance in this risk-reward equation. It's one that relies on faith-filled confidence and trust. There's vast numbers of people today who are awash in incessant media coverage of a relative few and their baubled, bangled, and beaded lifestyle. And at the same time, this vast number are busy coping with daily activities while entertaining daydreams of their own cast to the winds lifestyle that only the wealthy seem to enjoy endlessly. For we live in the world, and as such we're exposed to the world's ways through the desires of accumulation of possessions. So it's only natural that our goals and accomplishments are, in fact, measured by the world's rewards. You see, trappings of fast lane living may entice, but with pompous illusions come risks, both here and hereafter. So, is there a difference between spiritual living and carnal living? Definitely. Spiritual presence is girded by balance, promoting longevity through peace and calm. Is one boring while the other thrills? Perhaps. But realize this: we each hear a siren call from life's path that holds rewards. But the question is always, at what risk? So last week in our prophecy segment, we looked at the third end times event that God promises the whole world will see. Remember, the first one was the reestablishment of Israel as a nation in May of 1948. This was prophesied in the book of Ezekiel, chapter 37. The second event the Lord promised the world would see is the current Gaza war, which was prophesied in Psalm 83. And the third is the Ezekiel war itself, which is on the horizon for humanity. This is prophesied in Ezekiel 38. Now you'll notice that each of these three events is more dangerous and decisive than the one before. But it's the 7 years between the Ezekiel War Treaty and Christ's second coming that God reaches out to the world, encouraging repentance. As his final line in the sand comes to fruition, God will call to humanity to make a choice between Christ and the Antichrist during these two time frames of the 7-year tribulation period. We're going to pause real quick for our second break while I get the chickens out of the yard. We'll be back in 2 minutes. You're listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. We're talking about the third event of end times that God will ensure the entire world witness. You see, it's between the end times 7 years, 2 periods, that God will call each and everyone still alive to align with him or to align with Satan for eternity. Now, in our study, we've noted that most end times events have already happened. In fact, of the 1,817 end times events prophesied in the books of the Bible, most of them have taken place. There's only a few left to be revealed. However, the ones left yet to occur will bring the world more damage, destruction, and death than has ever occurred in any given short period before. These will take place in the 7-year tribulation period, and they will be horrific. The 7 years in the tribulation are divided into 2 separate and equal time frames. There are 2 time frames of 3.5 years each. There are also 2, the same 2, divided into days, 1,260 days each. And they're divided into months, 2 sets of 42 months each. If you read prophecy, you'll notice that all 3 of these time indicators are given in different books of the Bible and different prophetic authors. It's 2 sets of 3.5 years, 2 sets of 1,260 days, and 2 sets of 42 months. The first half is called the wrath of Christ, while the second half is called the wrath of God. This gives you some indication of the severity of the plagues that will torment people on earth. The importance, however, of these days, months, and years are notable because in the first half, God engages the world. But in the second half, God concerns himself only with the remnant of Israel. So what does this statement mean and why is it important? Whether you are a believer or a non-believer of any religion or spiritual system other than Judaism, in the second half, the second part of the tribulation years, you will only have one place to choose from, and that's to be aligned with the remnant of Israel. So between today and the mid-tribulation point, that is 3.5 years after the signing and ratification of the Ezekiel War Treaty, that's the last effort and time we have as non-Jews to come to God spiritually through belief in Jesus as the Christ or the Messiah. Because it's at the mid-tribulation point that God's sole focus will turn from the people of the world and be directed exclusively towards the remnant of Israel in Petra, Jordan, as they come to believe in Jesus as the Messiah. So, if you're not part of the Israeli remnant and you're in the second half of the tribulation years, the last 3.5 years, these will be the worst time on earth. As Jesus himself declares, the suffering in these final years will be as never before experienced in the history of the world. Think about that statement for a minute. Warning words from the lips of Christ himself. There will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world and never to be equaled again. This is found in Matthew 24:21. So as you learn more about prophecy and see the damage, the death, and destruction taking place today in your daily news feed, keep these words in mind. What you are witnessing is a small precursor part of what lies ahead. So, what to expect? Jesus himself tells us that the world is currently experiencing birth pains. Between today and the end of the Ezekiel war, the worst calamities that you've seen or gone through recently is nothing compared to what's ahead in the next 3 to 5 years as we get closer to the Ezekiel war prophesied in the book of Ezekiel 36, 37, 38, and 39. The damage, destruction, and death that we see today will be on steroids in the coming days. And there will be no relief on any level. Climate, political, social upheavals, the hatred and violence will continue. The fear and isms and phobias will continue, and the misinformation and disinformation will become rampant. People won't know who or what they can trust or believe in as being truth. AI will contribute to this to a point where you won't know what you're seeing and what you're hearing is truth or not. As a result, the clamor in the world will become a din. It will become so loud and so prevalent that the world will chime in on wanting a savior to step in to take all of this death and destruction away. And when the Ezekiel war is just on the verge of starting, and Israel's enemies are aligned against her on the northern borders of Syria and Lebanon, Israel will stand alone. But it's this point in history that God will throw himself into the mix and make his presence known to the entire world as he puts Israel's enemies into disarray. The world will actually be witness to the climatic and cosmic forces that caused this defeat for Israel's enemies. This 10-nation group of military alignment led by Russia, Iran, and Turkey. It's here that believers in Christ and prophecy will know differently. We will know what's going on because we recognize prophecy's validity and veracity before our very eyes. We will know the truth and recognize God's words in action. When this Ezekiel war ends, reparations and conditions will be drawn up for a treaty to be signed and ratified. The 7-year tribulation starts as these prophesied end times and last day events begin in rapid succession. Some of the ones that we've talked about here on Small Changes, Big Dividends, the rest we will be talking about in our prophecy segment in future shows. Now, this week's prophecy question comes from Patty in Boston, who asks, how will we know when the end of the world is coming? What are the signs? Well, Patty, thanks for asking. Prophecy's entire focus and purpose is to inform us, to warn us, and to alert us to future events that will allow us to recognize the end time events of this world. You see, many of these signs are veiled or hidden as to their specific details until they actually come to pass. And most require some digging and research. But that said, God wants us to know. So he helps us to see the big picture by connecting smaller dots and relationships. Now, God could simply tell us, but even when he does, most people simply ignore it. They don't hear it or they doubt it. Many people want to know when he and his prophets have shared what's about to happen. The situation is when he speaks or tells or shows us, it requires that we trust that what he is telling us is truth. And if you don't have a relationship with the Lord, his truth seems like fabrications and tall tales. You see, we live in a world that doesn't want to know the truth. Therefore, we ignore him and what he shares with us. Prophecy doesn't tell us when the world will end, but it does forewarn us by giving us signs to recognize both before and when we see these events taking place. I mentioned before, there are 1,817 prophecies in the Bible, and every one of them pertains to or refers to Jesus as the Christ, the Messiah. Most of these prophecies have already occurred. And as each has come to pass as foretold, I'm often asked about the end times and last day signs that are left to be shown. The ones that have come previously have taken decades, even centuries to unfold, depending on when they were shared and stated. Think of it this way. Before you get a driver's license, you prepare, right? You get a driver's manual to study, you get a vehicle for practice, and you continue to learn and practice how to become more efficient and more proficient behind the wheel. So when you're fully prepared and ready, you take the driver's test. Well, the same holds true for end times and last days events and world signs. Their culminations will be revealed by what we see or experience. However, the pre-incremental steps that are taking place in our life today are the ones that I'm sharing on Small Changes, Big Dividends. This is to alert you and share with you the things that you see revealed now and their connection to the big end times and last days events that we can be sure are going to come. These unmistakable, undeniable, and unmissable signs will be seen by the entire world, indicating that the end is in fact imminent. Jesus tells us in Matthew 24, it is at the door. So the start and end of the Ezekiel War, our third end times event the whole world will witness, is in fact on the horizon. When you see this military coalition led by Russia, Turkey, and Iran preparing to invade Israel's Golan Heights region, or the mountains of Israel, under the auspices of enforcing the UN Resolution 2334, and it looks like Israel will be completely destroyed, God himself will intervene on Israel's behalf, destroying her enemies. Then, when you see a treaty signed, confirmed, and accepted, ending this Ezekiel War conflict, the man who would be the broker and the prime mover and shaker behind this treaty will step forward as the author, architect, and broker of this treaty. This is found in Daniel 9:27. When you see the third Jewish temple being rebuilt in Jerusalem, know that the end is upon us. This is prophesied in Daniel 9:27 as well. When you see these signs, be prepared. We're going to take our final break. When we return, we're going to look at some audience questions that have come in. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. I'm your host, Branch Isole, and we'll be right back. Welcome back. You're watching and listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends. I'm your host, Branch Isole. This week's listener question comes from Jeremy in Atlanta. Kind of an interesting question. He asks, will we have to go through every variant from Alpha to Omega in these various virus pandemics? Well, Jeremy, thanks for your question. Before I can answer, let me say that I am not a doctor, nor do I play one on TV. So I'm going to give you a personal opinion. Will we have to go through every variant in the virus pandemics? Possibly. Who knows? These kind of issues are over when they're over. Again, Matthew 24 warns us there will be one like another, and one next virus or bacterial enemy of man to take place after COVID-19. There have been a variety of plagues with variants and mutations throughout history. And we have eradicated many and have produced vaccines for others. And yet they still occur and spread. Microbiology entities are as much a part of life and existence as we are. Life started as one-cell organisms. So they've been with us since the very beginning, and they'll be with us until the very end. Thankfully, we have academic knowledge, research and development, and technology to affect them more quickly and more forcefully than we did in the past. But because our world is more accessible today than ever before in human history, we run the risk of outbreaks of some kind occurring and spreading on a daily basis. So no matter how good a vaccine may be, the nature of nature is that some hosts, some people, are more susceptible than others. This has to do with so many factors that we have no control over. Heredity, exposure, environment, health practices, health excesses. So the chances of getting another viral infection are as good or not as you may be of getting some other malady. Some will get sick, vaccinated or not. Some will die, vaccinated or not. And some will recover or never be infected, vaccinated or not. So, the best advice I can give you is to listen to the experts, not talking heads, who have a particular or a personal ilk or persuasion they are trying to share or sell. Make informed choices in these and every aspect of your life. Thanks for your question, Jeremy. If you have a question you'd like answered on air, you can call me during the live show or send an email with your question to my website anytime during the week. Thanks for joining me today. On Small Changes, Big Dividends, we discuss personal, career, and spiritual Christianity essentials for growth-filled living. If you know someone who could benefit from today's episode, please share it with them. If today's episode has been helpful for you, please give us a rating and review. And to know more about my work, my books, my ebooks, my merchandise, greeting cards, and formatted gift mats, visit my website, branchisole.com. Today's show has been sponsored by Crystal Creek Farm. So if you have a product, a business, or a service you'd like to share with the world on Small Changes, Big Dividends, send your inquiry to the website. You've been listening to Small Changes, Big Dividends on the Bold Brave Media TV and Talk Global Network. Until next week, be in the world, not of the world.
This has been Small Change, Big Dividends. When you're ready for healthier, more successful relationships at home or work, Small Change, Big Dividends is your show. Wednesdays, 4 p.m. Eastern on the Bold Brave TV network.